Well, hey there, hello, it's I, Connor, the funny lion guy who lives in your phone screen or computer monitor or whatever. You know, the guy who talks about Monster Hunter so much that it's kind of got to the point where it's an active detriment to my upload schedule. So we got a second title update for Monster Hunter Wilds. That's pretty cool. And hey, I would say that this is probably the highest regarded the game has been in the broader community since it came out, for the most part. So that's also pretty cool. And, you know, now that it's been a couple of days, we've had time to just kind of sit and marinate and fight the monsters a couple of times. And some of you have had the chance to try out the gear. I haven't had time, but I've listened to a little bit of insight, so I at least kind of know what I'm talking about. We can just look at this stuff and talk about whether or not we think it's good, we think it's bad. And spoiler alert, pretty darn good, even past that really strong first impression that the title update made the night it came out. But I definitely want to talk about it. And of course, we're going to start out with the guy that everybody's here for and everybody's super excited for, Seregios. Yeah, Mr. Steven. That's right, I've bamboozled you. We're gonna talk about this one first, because I want to talk about him, and I know for a fact that just the way these things work is once Laggy stops being talked about, there's gonna be a little bit of a fall off. And I do actually legitimately want to talk about Seregios because I think he's quite good in this game and designed in a very interesting way. And you know, you can use the timestamps if you want to duck around this part and just get to the Laggy stuff anyway. I'm sorry for deceiving you, but yeah. All right, so Seregios has always kind of been like this always the bridesmaid, never the bride type of guy. You know, everybody likes him for the most part. He's been good in just about every entry he's shown up in, but he's never been the headliner, especially the time when he was supposed to be the headliner. He kind of gets beaten out by the Magalas, even in his own narrative in 4, and then you get around to Generations, and that's just kind of an asset dump. And you get to Sunbreak, and like, oh man, Seregios is back, but there's also Astalos and the entire Magala line and a frontier monster showing up. Honestly, biggest pop he's probably ever received is I think he's like the toughest of the exotic monsters in the G rank of Frontier. But even then, he doesn't get like one of the cool edgy boy forms that you've probably seen online if you don't know anything about Frontier anyway, so yeah. And now, you know, shows up in Wilds. Nice big pop. Everybody's really excited. But there's also, you know, the giant electric crocodile elephant in the room that, once again, gonna take up a little bit of perception there. So what is Seregios to do, right? Well, just kind of come in, do his thing, and honestly, I think do his thing really well. See, I've talked a lot, and I'm gonna continue to talk about, because I think it's something that this game does really well, about monsters designed around focus mode, and understanding what game they're in, and understanding how that mechanic works, and creatively and interestingly maneuver around it. It's the big reason why Arkveld's such a good flagship for this game. And Seregios comes in, and I would say in terms of battles that want to test the limits of how focus mode works and very fluid, intelligent feeling maneuvering around monsters, Seregios he's up there. He's a lot of fun. I'm not necessarily saying he's better than Arkveld, but as a monster who's a bit of a reaction check and is trying to make sure you're paying attention and keeping yourself on your toes and playing off of how the movesets of your weapons work, Seregios is among the better ones in the game. And that's because the dude just loves to move around a lot. He loves the foot dives and the kicks and all that stuff, to the point where some people, I think, just kind of don't like him because they think that all he does is the foot dive kicks. What I think warrants understanding is that when he goes up into the air and he goes hacking at you from one side, stops for a little bit, and then comes hacking back at you from the other side, that's not his AI bugging out and spamming attacks. That's actually just a programmed true combo with a potential combo extension when he gets enraged. That little animation pause in the middle isn't because he's selecting a new attack with his AI. It's because the developers made it so that Seregios is able to compensate for human reaction time, because those kicks are quick. And for basically adept style the Monster Hunter game, if you like your perfect dodge timings and your perfect block timings, I think you're really gonna like Seregios, because he is built for perfect timing interactions with his moveset. And me, I've always liked things like Evade Window. You know, there's a reason why I really like the combat in Frontier. So if you're gonna design a monster around the fact that you're doing perfect timing interactions with his move kit, I'm going to like him a lot. So to put things in a little bit of context, context, the day before I recorded this audio, I was on Wilds for like 3 hours or something like that, and I just wanted to fight Seregios and Lagiacrus a bunch, and I was gonna ping pong back and forth between them just to kind of keep it fresh and, you know, just take some mental notes and whatnot of what I thought, and just, you know, like I said, I was gonna bounce back and forth between the two. I fought Seregios with a bow 3 times in a row because I was having so much fun that I didn't want to stop playing. So take that for the endorsement that it is. But yeah, so I feel like Seregios just really understands what game he's in. And not even with just the kicks, but he's also kind of just a crafty little bitch too, especially with the blade scales. I've always kind of liked that his blade scale projectiles will do these kind of little flinches and not full knockdowns or anything like that. And it can kind of trip you up and stun you and trick your brain into thinking that you're actually not able to move, and then he's just gonna cross you up and bamboozle you and hit you with something else even though you didn't go into a full knockdown. I think, honestly, if we're comparing versions, I think the one who is the best with the finesse with the blade scale flinging is probably the Sunbreak one. That one has a lot of combos where he likes to fling the scales, fly out, fly back in. He loves weaving those in. This one likes the dives a whole lot more, and I think if you really wanted to fatten up this moveset, you could do a little bit of a combination with how the Sunbreak one worked and how the Wilds one worked. So you just have a little bit more scale projectile shenanigans, then you go out and you come back in and stuff like that. But the way he's set up for him to cross you up, to get behind you, it's the first monster in the game where I felt like I've needed to hit the auto track button, like L1 on the DualShock controller, so that I can actually redirect, so I can see him coming from the next angle, because he's just really, really quick. So once you get those timings, that dance is fun. Like, really, really fun. And back to the blade scale stuff, he loves to just kind of dash out of your sight, basically kind of go 90 degrees off, get out of your peripherals for a second, give you like a second to delay because you think he might go for a dive, but nope, he's going for the scale buckshot off of that and tries to catch you with that. So you want to kind of understand the intricacies of the animations where he'll go for the kicks or the ones where he'll go to your sides, and kind of start to understand that he's going to want to try and fake you out with a dive, but instead go for the scale toss. He feels cunning, and this is something I've talked about over and over again. We're probably going to just keep talking about it because the intelligence, the fluidity, the ability for the monsters to kind of set little bait and switch traps for you and try to autopilot you and then catch you unawares with something you weren't expecting feels great. And I applaud Wilds for being a game that actually seemed to understand how powerful the tool it was giving the hunter, and then giving the monsters some ability to actually kind of compensate. And we could talk about wounds, though wounds, to be fair, have been nerfed into the dirt where they belong, but the actual abilities that focus mode provides are being compensated for at a rate that, you know, say base Rise monsters were never ever able to compensate for until like Sunbreak against the wire bugs. You know, until you get to, I'd say probably like Crimson Glow Volstrax and maybe some of like the advanced quests towards the very, very end of base Rise's life cycle, the monsters just couldn't compete with the tools that you were given. But now the flagship's built around it, and a lot of the TU monsters have been built around it, and I think Seregios is probably like the de facto focus mode monster. And I don't think it makes him the best one in the game, but I think it makes him enormously fun if you're even like middlingly proficient at using these mechanics. I will say though, the way that he's set up, it makes it so that tight corners, tight little passageways, and his nest can be a little frustrating, but if you have your iframes down, you're gonna be fine. But you know those like those push toys that babies get where it's like the little thing on wheels and the ball, it's like a little popper thing that makes the balls bounce around. That's kind of what you and Seregios look like when you're flipping around in his nest, is just two balls bouncing off of walls together in a really, really tight and closed space, just kind of smacking into walls and everything. It's kind of fun, but those big, wide open vistas in the Windward Plains is where you really want to be fighting him. When we were talking about the game coming out, I was excited for like, oh man, what's Rathalos going to be able to do with all this space? Turns out Seregios is the monster who's going to be using all that space and make a really good use of it. Not what I was expecting. Pretty happy about it. And then some other things to talk about him besides just the fight design. Again, I haven't really had time to make anything or play with anything, but I watched a bunch of other people who actually kind of know what they're talking about run weapons and armor. Seems like Seregios' stuff for the majority is stuff that's alright and kind of fun, but isn't gonna, you know, redefine how the game is played or anything. It's a lot of stuff built around iframing, which again, I really enjoy. I love weapons that iframe. So I love dual blades in this game. I love bow in this game. Sounds great to me, right? They changed around how blade scale honing works, and it's kind of interesting. It's this meter of pseudo purple sharpness. It's actually, I think, mathematically a tiny bit better than purple. You only get it for so long and for so many hits that it's gonna be really tough to kind of maintain your uptime for. But again, if you're in a fight where it's a lot of bobbing and weaving and the monster's throwing out a whole bunch of attacks and they have some pretty fast response times and you're gonna be like deliberately iframing things over and over again, then Seregios, his armor and weapons look like they're a lot of fun, and it looks like, you know, they're comparable and respectable, but at the max level play, when you're really trying to optimize your uptimes and everything, you're not really going to use it, especially because it's one where you really want the monster to be doing their thing. And in speedrunning, that's kind of not what you want them to do. Typically, you want to kind of mulch them into the ground, so you're not really going to get any uptime out of that. But for a more kind of layman approach, which I typically do, Seregios stuff looks fun. And then you get to the bow guns. Apparently, the bow guns are ridiculous. Like, the bonus that they get built into them is insanely good, with some crazy multipliers on them. In fact, apparently it's so good that the heavy bowgun actually has like slightly reduced raw attack values compared to most of Seregios' other weapons, cause it's kinda just that ridiculous. If anything gets me into bowgunning, it's sounding like Seregios' stuff might get me to try bow gunning. And then only other thing worth mentioning is I like talking about the music. The music's interesting. I think as a track, it's good. I like it a lot. When compared to the other two, though, I think it's probably the weakest character piece that Seregios has. I listened to it a bunch, and I was wondering what sounded so different. And it's that the big kind of blaring, blasting horns that he usually has are a lot less frantic. Especially notable is in that kind of big crescendo moment that Seregios gets. The horns are playing on eighth notes when they're usually playing on triplets. So it's not that the track, I think, has a particularly slower BPM, but the actual horns themselves aren't playing as many notes as they used to, and it can make the track feel a little stripped down. Meanwhile, they kind of back-ended a lot of the speed to the percussion, so it has like a really good rhythm and pace to it, kind of in that backing line of lower stuff in the background. But what this kind of does, at least in like the theater of my mind's eye when it comes to music, is that Seregios' theme doesn't as much feel like an erratic, frantic, all over the place, duck diving, flying wyvern as much anymore. It feels like something that's bigger, stronger, heavier, but still fast, but moving kind of in a straight line. That's kind of what the big booming kind of blaring horns on quarter notes and the driving percussion on eighths is communicating more towards my brain. Because they do this, they're allowed to kind of get with these slower, more menacing phases in with the track that kind of break off from the typical Seregios motif. I think there's a good Dondormo reference in there. So this is a track that I like how it's arranged, I like how it sounds, but it kind of just doesn't have Seregios' feel to it in a couple of ways. Honestly, you know what? I said this, I think, once in like my Discord, but I'll say it again. This is a Diablos theme with Seregios' melody. The way that things are set up communicates that kind of speed and aggression over the speed and aggression that you're usually assuming you're gonna get with Seregios. All right, fine, I'll talk about the boring part now. Okay, so there's a crocodile with a taser running around in the woods. Someone will handle it, I'm sure. Yeah, so Lagiacrus, John Lennon, he's been away for a while. We've been asking for him and praying for him, and there's been test footage from World and blah, 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 and the mod who's in Sunbreak and the Resurgence thing that hasn't come out at this point, and Lagiacrus, underwater, blah, 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 blah. You have him now, you happy? Studies show yes, you are. So, Laggy feels like he was meticulously crafted for a very long time. And meticulously crafted to just kind of be perfect. Maybe not so much the underwater part. We'll talk about that, though I don't think that part's bad or anything. But he's just kind of perfect. And I don't even mean that in like an artificial, like there's nothing offensive about him, but he's kind of bland kind of way. No, it just all kind of works. Like his pressure is good, but it's nothing that can't be dealt with. And he's got a really cool charge mechanic, but he's not over-reliant on it. And he doesn't have any blind spots, but he's not too spammy. It's kind of a way to respond to pretty much any distance or any direction of attack and do so in like a couple of different ways. He can bite at you if you get up in his face. He's got full body shocks if he wants to get a group off of him. He's got a couple of tail attacks, coil and uncoil. He's got his hip checks and whatnot. He's just kind of got like a couple of different ways to deal with pretty much anything. And his attacks have a little bit of delay on him for the offsets and whatnot, but not that much. And he can punish your mistakes if you make them, and can do so pretty efficiently. One thing that I've noticed about him is that a lot of his attacks, they have some decent windup to them, but they kind of don't have a ton of end lag, especially some of those bite moves. I've caught myself a number of times. I'll get tripped up by a bite attack or by a check or something like that, and he's facing right at me, so I'm like, all right, I'm gonna stand up right in his face, and I'm just gonna go with like the swax counter right immediately. But his windup is so that I'm gonna get caught. And the other thing with his attacks kind of just not having a ton of end lag on them is he can pull off some pretty effective combos without having a lot of true combos, which is nice because modern Monster Hunter has sometimes kind of struggled to do that. For as fast as they make the hunters, especially in the low rank and the high rank levels of their games, yeah, you might get hit by something, but then, I don't know, you're not really gonna get reliably punished for a sloppy getup that much. But Laggy's gonna be like, no, you're just trying to go for an easy option? All right, fine, I'm gonna go for that quick bite again. You're back on your butt. And that's kind of cool. He can go from the lightning blasts into his slithering charge pretty quick. And not a lot of it true combos, but there's a lot of it where he can just kind of rip them off pretty reliably pretty quick. And he'll catch you for being lazy. And especially on the tempered version, that's kind of scary. So you definitely want to pay attention. I'd say he feels faster to fight than he looks. Because when you're actually fighting him, the attacks aren't like crazy quick. They're not going at 1,000,000 miles per hour, but it's just the gaps in between them are pretty fluid for the most part. And it's a lot of fun to deal with, especially once you kind of get good at anticipating his moves and facing off against them and either offsetting them or countering them or iframing them or whatever. It's another monster where he's really good with the interacting with his moveset and the perfect blocking and timing and dodging and all that kind of stuff, but it's set up in a way that's different from Seregios, where Seregios really kind of wants you to be using the focus mode and the perfect engagement and whatnot because he's just so fast and crosses you up so much. Laggy just has a moveset that marries together with itself insanely well, so you want to be using your tools to actually engage with it properly. And it's an interesting kind of dichotomy of ways to do very similar things, and it keeps the monsters from blending together and feeling like they're the same thing over and over and over again. Because again, as much as I like to cross up and blow past you and follow up move, if every monster was always doing it, that would feel really stale. So I appreciate that. But yeah, no, they took Lagiacrus, the 3rd generation one, not the 4th generation one, because the 4th gen one stinks. Though he's got like 1 or 2 big body shocks that version has, but uses them way less and doesn't have the same volume of them. And he also doesn't really pilfer a ton off of Ivory Lagiacrus, which I was kind of afraid he would do that too. Though there might be some comparisons in there. I haven't fought Ivory or watched his gameplay in a very long time. But they really just kind of took the 3rd generation Laggy moveset and expanded it by, God, it feels like, especially when you take into consideration all of the moves that he can get with like the supercharged state, and I think they've like borderline tripled his kit. So it's just, everything feels fatty and meaty, and even if you're at the same angle, he can still respond in different ways. And like I was saying earlier, he can just interact with everything that you're doing. He doesn't really have blind spots where you just sit in one area and peck at him. He can just kind of hit you from wherever. I'll say another thing. I feel like Laggy in this game is kind of like a soft confirmation that we're just straight up not getting Zinogre, which it kind of felt like we weren't anyway, but the way he works is that he has this supercharged state that he can hit, and then once he gets into that supercharged state, he has access to new attacks. His lightning attacks get some new properties on them, and he gets some combo extensions. So you have a 3rd generation lightning-based flagship monster in Wilds with a supercharged electric state that gives you more lightning attacks and combo extensions. So yeah, that's just Zinogre, but it doesn't feel like Zinogre at all. And you know what? I'm fine with it. As much as I'm not really one who subscribes to the let's give everything a break and not let them come back a whole bunch of times, that's fine. We don't need Zinogre in this game. We're fine without him with Laggy, I'd say. But yeah, I'm never really kind of not having fun when I'm fighting him on the ground. Well, now then, there's the underwater part. And it kind of went pretty much exactly the way I expected. You do it for the first time, you see the big Cyclone super attack, and everyone oohs and ahs, and it looks really cool, and it doesn't feel bad at all, and it's kind of fun. But then, you know, you fight him for the 7th time, the 8th time, the 9th time, blah, 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 and by the limitations that exist, it turns into a little bit of a novelty. I've fought him, I think like 7 times now. I fought him like 3 times in a row last night. Do I think it's become this like mind-numbing, completely and utterly unfun piece of crap novelty that, you know, oh, this is nothing but fan service and shouldn't be in the game? No, it's fine. I think that's partially because I was expecting less. I was expecting less out of the controls. I was expecting less out of how scripted I thought it was gonna feel. I was expecting you to have a little less to do, to have a little less options. But yeah, you go in there and you're kind of trying to bait out the lightning attacks and you anticipate those. You counter those off with the slinger shots. You try to get him to corral himself under the ruins and drop those on him. And then, honest to God, they brought kind of Clutch Claw back with underwater stuff. So when you get him in that flinch state, you latch onto him and you stab him until you make wounds on him. Then you can hit those for big damage. But you can also, and this is what I kind of like about the Clutch Claw, is if you really wanna and you bait out certain attacks, you can still grab onto him and start working on a couple of those wounds even when he's not in that knock state and try to hit him like that. It's risky because you might get thrown off or he'll do a big body shock which can hit ya, but the controls to get off of him and then to get out of dodge are really responsive, and the dedicated ascend and descend buttons are really responsive. Everything just kind of flows really nice. Feels good. The maneuvering with the camera controls, the ascend and the descend and everything, it's super limited, but it feels good. And if you're being persistent, you kind of know what you're doing, you've maybe stocked up on a couple of wounds, which you can strategically use things like mounts for and whatnot, then you're gonna be able to get through the underwater section pretty quick if you know what you're doing. But I can imagine someone who's like speed running Laggy or is just really trying to hardcore grind and has fought him 15 times. You're like, okay, I get it. Yeah, whatever. Definitely gonna wear off. It's definitely hasn't worn off as harshly as I thought it was going to. It's better designed than I thought it was gonna be. does this mean anything? At this point, it does or it doesn't. I'm gonna be honest. It does or it doesn't. I don't know. I honestly, I don't think you should promise yourself anything. At the same time, if, say, an expansion comes out or Monster Hunter 7 comes out and there's underwater combat, I don't think that will be a surprising thing at this point. This is a lot of effort. A lot of effort for just this. And it's a nice little thing for fans, sure, but this is a lot of effort for just a one and done little cinematic thing that you can blitz through in 45 seconds. And honestly, if you had dedicated weapon attacks and whatnot underwater, and then you still have all of that really responsive diving, ascending and descending, and much better camera controls, and just far, far, far better movement than the underwater and Tri ever allowed for, then yeah, the underwater part probably not gonna have a ton of complaints. They'd have to fatten up his moveset down there, because his moveset is limited to kind of play off the fact that your toolkit is very limited. The other neat thing, though, is that it actually plays up into the fight. You know, if you let Laggy do the big shock thing, not only does it look awesome, but he comes back out of the water with a fair bit of health still intact, and he has this super mode where he's got a whole bunch of crazy attacks and everything, and he's just much more aggressive and does a ton of damage. The tempered form of this guy is horrifying, by the way. Probably the new scariest monster in the game. I don't know. Gore is also really hard hitting, and his timings are super weird, but it's probably between Laggy and Gore, which Laggy and Gore being the two scariest monsters in a Monster Hunter game is awesome to me. I'll keep talking about it. I think that's super, super cool. But yeah, underwater coming back, it will or it won't. At this point, I've talked about it so many times. I've seen so many things that I thought were indicators, and then they just brought Lagiacrus back and did a pseudo fake underwater thing, which I don't think anybody thought they were ever going to do. So who knows at this point? I'm not going to pretend to know anything. I think it'd be cool, and what I've seen so far, I think they'd probably get it to feel pretty damn good, for the most part at the very least. And what's here? A novelty, sure, not bad though. And then kind of moving on to the gear and whatnot. The armor sets just has a lot of really cool skills built into it. A lot of Wex, a lot of max might and stamina management and stuff like that. Just stuff that's flat out really good. Basically kind of like a lightning form of Scorcher with a little bit of affinity. I don't remember if anyone said that that's overtly really, really good or not. The other thing that I've heard is if you're running weapons against lightning weak monsters, it's sounding like Laggy weapons are at this point the better option over Ardean, which is really interesting. I kind of didn't think we were ever gonna get to a point where they had stuff better than Ardean. Not that it's like head and shoulders gigantic higher than Ardean, but better, which is, I think, awesome, because I don't like Ardean weapons all that much, and I'm kind of hoping that the expansion just kind of doesn't have them, or we get like another weapon tier somewhere down the line in high rank that makes it so that every weapon in the game goes up a little bit and has 3/3s on decos and stuff like that. Just something to make it so that the monster weapons are more worthwhile. And here we go. If you want to run lightning in the game, you're running Laggy weapons, which, thank goodness, I'm gonna be honest. So we know what we're gonna be throwing at Uthduna when she comes out. That'll be fun. So that's really nice that we have not a ton of meta shakeup, but some meta shakeup if you really care about that. Some options that are a bit better than the Ardeans, and then even if, you know, you don't want to run this stuff that's super optimal, it looks like all of the gear is at the very least fun to play around with Seregios and with Lagiacrus. So that's encouraging. And then music-wise, it's great. It's the Deserted Island theme with To One With Life woven in there. And it sounds really good. It's not stripped down. The original might have a slightly punchier bit of sound design. The music, the way it was mixed in Tri overall is really, really good. But this one is pretty much just right about on par. They have this kind of added, really kind of somber sounding violin mixed in there. And that, I think, just, I don't know, it kind of adds this baked in feeling, I think, of like nostalgia. Like the music understands how long Lagiacrus is gone. And that's kind of cool. You feel it when that violin kicks in. And then when To One With Life starts going, it's a slightly combatified version of the track. It sounds great. It weaves in with the rest of the piece really naturally. They have just a slight transition chunk in there, and then it goes in, plays a stanza of that, and then comes back out, and it sounds great. I think some people who want to be cynical about this game are gonna look at how Laggy operates and think of it as just kind of just fanfare and fan service and all that stuff, but one, it's really not. You know, just the grounded moveset by itself is exceptionally well put together, I would say. But then with the things like the music and the underwater and all that stuff, it's kind of doing what you would want nostalgia to do. Like, number one, it does kind of create that old feeling of like, oh, this is back when I was a kid. I feel this again. But at the same time, it's not intrusive. It actually brings some level of enhancement to the stuff that is actually new. And, you know, in some really good cases with nostalgia, it actually gets brought back to be improved upon a little and work with some potential that it had but wasn't capitalized on in the original outing. And at the very least, with the handling of Underwater, that is kind of how I feel. Like, it's going back and playing it on a couple of streams every now and again. The responsiveness of the controls down there, even with a DualShock, is just, it's not great. And like, yeah, no, there's the limitations because you can't swing your weapon around, but just the handling is so much better. And let's say, for instance, they do go, oh, people were really liking how things were handling with the laggy thing, so maybe we do want to look at this and do dedicated weapon movesets and bring some underwater stuff back and really play around with this, and this is a worthwhile investment again. Well, then the big nostalgia boom with Lagiacrus is actually potentially pretty substantial there, and could lead to Underwater coming back with aplomb and being way better and actually, you know, being what we thought it was when we were kids, but it kind of actually wasn't. Okay, now let's just kind of finish it out with all the other stuff. So, where's the game going? What else got added and stuff like that? Well, there's some weapons balance changes that I haven't followed a ton of. If you're someone who plays a weapon that got a lot of overhauls, go ahead and tell me down below just how you're feeling about changes brought about to your weapon. I know that Hammer players in general are feeling pretty good because I think they have 3 offsets now, which is kind of sick. There's the layered weapons that got brought in, which is awesome. You know, even without Ardian weapons, layered weapons are great. And now they've been added substantially earlier to the game than they ever were historically. I think even at its earliest, you got to hit like TU2 of Sunbreak for them to be introduced. But here we are with TU2 of the base game of Wilds, and we're getting the layered weapons. And you have to put in a little bit of effort to get them, but they're not a big pain in the ass. And then again, I don't play on PC, but there's the whole thing with performance, right? And from what I'm hearing pretty much across the board, it's still not like awesome in a couple of places. There's places where it crashes. There's a couple of graphical errors here and there. There's still a lot of roughness and issues with, you know, how the engine works and how the DRM works and all that kind of stuff. But I was pretty surprised to hear just how much better people were saying that, especially the frame rate was. Again, if you play this on PC, you could probably say, oh, there's still this issue, that issue, and the other issue, and you can tell me about that if you want to, but I've been hearing pretty much universal testimonies like, wow, no, it runs so much smoother. There's way less stuttering and all that, and awesome, good for you. I think a lot of us were kind of in this area where like, dude, it's just kind of, I don't know. It's, unless they get the DRM out, which I think they might be doing eventually, it might just be in this place where it's never gonna feel that great. It's just too weird with the DRM and how the engine works and everything. But yeah, apparently the improvements that got hit were pretty darn substantial, so that's great. Again, you know, the conversation that pops up anytime we talk about performance. Should have been better on launch? Absolutely. Took a good long while for them to get it to where it is right now, and honestly, I think there was a couple of spots where performance actually got worse from the updates, but to hear that there is a notable improvement, I'm very happy to hear. Let's talk about a couple of other things, though, about where we kind of think the game is going. I think it is hilarious, honestly, that we probably have the single most difficult high-rank Monster Hunter like ever at this point, because the game comes out, right, and you got the wound closers and how they stagger lock, and you got the things with status build up and how that's way too aggressive, and the monsters don't have a lot of health, and they're not doing a ton of damage, and the players are doing a ton of damage, so the game's too easy, the game's for babies. This is like the Call of Duty-ification of Monster Hunter. It's, the normies have destroyed it forever. Back in my day, when I used to play Monster Hunter, you know, if you didn't really know what you you were doing, a fight could take like 15 minutes, right? And the monsters were able to like 2 and 3 tap you on everything. And if I wanted to make all the gear and whatnot, it took me like 15 to 20 hunts to get all the gear that I wanted. You know, the Wilds drops way too many parts. Well, now we're at the point where unless you're speed running and you really know what you're doing, the fights are going to take 15 minutes and the monsters can 2 to 3 tap you and the drop rates are now going down. So if you want to get everything, you kind of have to fight them like 15 to 20 times. And then everyone in the community just went, oh. And it's just so funny to me. It's hilarious. I like it. I think the game's kind of going in a perfectly fine direction, and I think it's making the adjustments that it really needed to make, because wow, yeah, I mean, I liked Wilds when it came out, and then I stuck with Wilds for a little while. Like, there's some stuff about it, man, that, like, I don't know, there is some casualification here that I am not a big fan of. So the developers just went, okay. Now players are like, man, this is a little too much. And I think this is kind of the thing that's going to happen when the developers keep wanting to make some new changes and make some new changes and make some new changes. And then they kind of sometimes don't really fully grasp the effects of how things are going to play out for people who are like really, really good at the game or whatnot. And then they kind of have to start course correcting, and then the numerical balances get all over the place. Because, dude, the contrast between, say, like tempered Laggy and his health and his damage and his wound buildup and all that kind of stuff, and then you compare that to, say, like a non-tempered monster that was in the base game, say, like, I don't know, a standard Rathian, it's so different how difficult and how powerful and how many advantages and disadvantages those two types of fights have. So I'm glad that we're going in this direction, but if we're being honest, some of the numerics of the game, unless some of the lower rung monsters get some universal changes, there's some really weird skewing all over the place. And I'm guessing that, you know, once the definitive version of the game is out and we have the expansion and everything, that a lot of the numerical values and how the wounds are going to work and how health values and damage are going to work and all the across the board, I think all of that is going to just iron itself out really quickly. But Wilds is in this stage currently where it's pretty experimental with just all of its numerics, and wow, it is all over the place. And I don't think that's bad, I just think it's really funny. So I'm progressively more and more encouraged. I think I want to talk about this a little bit sooner, but in terms of difficulty and replayability and the depth of monster roster that you actually want to engage with the top level stuff, I think we're just kind of progressively moving towards one of the best high ranks that they've ever devised. It's just been taking months for them to figure out exactly how they want to balance that out. And it's just funny to me. I don't think it's bad. I don't think it's good. I think it's funny. And it does, like I said, it encourages me that I think we're going to have a really, really fun, really challenging, but also very engaging master rank. But the game is still going through growing pains. At this point, though, I think we're starting to kind of figure out where we are, because the monsters are feeling a lot better and a lot more threatening, a lot more fun, and the wound systems and the status buildup isn't decimating everything every second now. It just feels good. It feels better. The game is healing, I would say. I just think it's hilarious. I think that's the bulk of what I want to talk about for the most part. Two really good monsters who do kind of different things, but both very well. Seregios, I think, is just a master of how the perfect timing interactions work. Lagiacrus just has one enormously well put together kit and a fun underwater mode that could potentially be important for something really cool down the line if they decide to go through with it, which, considering the reaction, I don't want to cope, but it's not 0, and it's higher than it used to be before this game came out. And then the numerical stuff is still kind of all over the place and ducking and diving, but the game definitely seems to know what it wants to do. And when compared to, you know, some other games that, you know, that gets popular and then it gets quote unquote normified or whatever, at the very least, the developers are like, yeah, okay, we see you, we hear you, we're gonna make it more challenging, and we're gonna get on that pretty quick. So, you know, some games, they'll kind of go to this place where it gets made for the casuals, and then it just kind of stays there. But the developers for Wilds are like, all right, now you guys have said your mind, stated your piece, you want to kind of go to this challenging position. All right, cool, let's give you one of the scariest high ranks we've ever made. And that's pretty cool. I like it. We'll talk a little bit more about Wilds as things go on. We'll cover Dune and whatnot. There's some other opinion pieces I want to cover about what I think the game is doing really well or not that well. But for now, that's more or less my feelings on the stuff that we got in TU2. Very impressed. I think this is an enormously strong title update just by the standards of especially the higher rank games. But even if we're kind of getting into some of the master rank stuff, this is a pretty strong one, I would say. But yeah, no, very happy with where Wilds is going. Excited for its future. I think the title updates have just progressively gotten more and more encouraging for me as we've gone on. Glad the game's running better. Awesome to see Laggy back. Very excited to see where the future holds. But as for right now, this has been CR-Volcanic or Connor. Tell me what you think about the title update, and I'll see you around. Bye! Shout out to all the patrons, and special shout out to Stromlin, Skyryu, Sir Newt Newt, Shaggy Grizzly, Sam Richley, Psychotic Gesture, P-Berry, Nihilist Chimerax, Ketz, Datboy Doing to Ding, Certified Rajang Hater, Sir SS Jacob, Pecco Plush, I Think I Stole Your Sandwich, and Call Sign Shadow. Thank you very much, everyone.